Good afternoon, friends. Today I'll be taking up a topic which is not just difficult to understand, but it is so complex, so multidimensional, and so badly intertwined into different aspects that it becomes very difficult not only to explain but even to comprehend. Now, the thing is that it's not as if it is difficult for an average student to understand it. Sometimes even top level diplomats also get confused when they study about West Asia, because even earlier I used to think the same way that, well, West Asia, all are Muslims. What can be the problem there? Right? There should be absolute peace. I mean, especially if you view from the fact that most of them are oil rich nations. I mean, this region should have been, what should I say, a paragon of prosperity, peace, and tranquility. But reality is that it is the most troubled regions in the world, right? And this region is the, I mean, this is the place where Islam took its birth and grew, right? So the thing is that, uh, let us see what exactly has happened here that this region is in turmoil. Now let me explain you something about origins of the Islam, right? Uh, as you know, I mean, it was established by Prophet Hazrat Muhammad, and ev- everything was fine as long as Muhammad was alive. But after his death, it was believed that, I mean, it was believed that the Khalifa, why I am using the word Khalifa is because it was believed that after Hazrat Muhammad, prophethood ends. There won't be any prophet, the last prophet of God, right? So as a result, but at the same times, there should be a Khalifa after prophet. Khalifa, Khilafat, Khalifat, use any of these words, right? Now, what is this institution? This institution is one which combine in itself, I mean, the characteristics of both the heads. That is, um, I mean, both the powers. That is, powers of political and religious powers. A Khalifa is not only religious head, but he is also political head, right? Unlike Christianity, where Christianity talks about the, I mean, theory of two swords of, I mean, wall of separation between church and the state. Islam never believed in that kind of separation. In fact, for Islam, religion was always, it was always tied up with the state, right? As a result, this institution of Khalifa is one where who combines in himself both spiritual as well as temporal powers, both the powers of the state and the church, or state, I mean, political as well as religious power. So it was expected that it is his son-in-law Ali who will succeed Muhammad, but that did not happen. It was Abu Bakr, father-in-law, father of in-law of Muhammad, Abu Bakr, who became the first Khalifa of Islam, right? And after that, it was Usman, Uthman, Umar, I mean, different. Then finally, fourth Khalifa was Ali. So that differences between Ali and Abu Bakr, what should I say, group was, I mean, this came to surface immediately after the death of Muhammad, right? As a result, all those who followed Abu Bakr, right, are called as Sunni Muslims. And all those who thought that injustice was done to Ali, son-in-law of Muhammad, it was they, I mean, they were called as Shias. Sunni, the word Sunni is derived from the word Sunnah or Sunnah, right? What is Sunnah? Because Islamic law from the very beginning is based on two important sources: Quran, that is their holy book, and secondly Sunnah. What are Sunnah or Hadith, that are called as, which are represented in Hadith? These are traditions of Prophet, right? Anyway, I don't want to go much into theology, but just remember, this Shia Sunni are differences cropped up immediately after the death of Hazrat Muhammad, right? Now, it doesn't, I don't want to go into the questions whether Quran itself provided for these differences or not. Perhaps it may not have provided, fine. But as I said, these things do not matter much. What matters is how process unfolds itself in terms of events. And this is how it unfolded, that they developed a difference between both Shias and Sunnis, right? There were times when these differences got subsided, and there were times when it came to surface, right? As a result, now in 1948, State of Israel was created. This enraged the Muslim world. I mean Muslims all over the world. I mean, to know greater detail of this, please listen to my lecture on Arab-Israel dispute, right? And this one incident, see why it was made, how it was made, what were the contention of Palestinians, what was the complaint of Muslim community, right? To cut the long story short, State of Israel was created in a place called Palestine, and UN, that too after UN resolution created not one but two states: State of Palestine for Arabs or Muslims, and State of Israel for Jews. But as I said, Muslims all over the world, except perhaps Turkey, and just look at the striking coincidence, today Turkey is opposed to United Arab Emirates developing close relations with Israel. In fact, Turkey was the first country to recognize Israel, right? So the thing is, as a result, this sort of clash between Shia and Sunni was there. I mean, it started, as I said, immediately after the death of Hazrat Muhammad. So, as I said, there were times when these differences got subsided, and there were times when these differences came to surface, right? Now, one of the important events in the history of Middle East is a very wrong usage, West Asia, is Arab-Israel dispute, creation of State of Israel in 1948 by UN, right? And since Arab countries never reconciled to that idea, as a result, even before the State of Israel was formally born, countries like Egypt, Syria and Jordan attacked it, right? And they wanted to erase the existence of Israel from the globe. But in turn, they were counter-attacked, and subsequently they attacked again 54, 67, and during that time, after the war, Israel occupied a large tracts of land, right? What was supposed to be a Palestinian state here, this region and this region, right? What was supposed to be Palestinian state, right? But the thing is that Israel even refused to vacate those lands, saying that unless and until I am recognized, when these countries believe in wiping out our existence, how do you expect us to return? And complaint of Israel was that it is not Israel which started the war. Ultimately, it is these Arab countries which started the war, right? So that dispute is going on. What is that dispute? Please listen to my lecture on Arab-Israel disputes. Anyway, this literally united Palestinian problems, created a sort of unity among Muslims all over the world. What we call as Pan-Islamism. Pan-Islamism is an ancient idea, right? It's not something modern, but there were times when it receded, right? uh, intra-civilizational differences came to surface, and there were times when Pan-Islamism asserted itself. What is Pan-Islamism? It's an ideology which believes that Muslims all over the world are one. They are not only one, but it is a superior race, and it has every right to rule the world. Others should either convert into Islam or accept the subordinate states of dhimmis. Right? This is the idea of Pan-Islamism, that Muslims all over the world are one. Right? So the thing is that this dispute, united Muslims all over the world against creation of Israel. They thought that UN, which is primarily dominated by Western powers, did grave injustice to Arabs. If they wanted to create a separate state for Jews, they should have done it in America or elsewhere. But the thing is that this was assault on Arabs. So as a result, Muslim opinions, got completely crystallized into Pan-Islamism. As I said, it is not a new but an ancient concept. Even Iqbal, wrote, Muslim ahem watan hai, sara jahan hamara. The whole world belongs to us, right? So the thing is, Pan-Islamism started asserting itself. Then Shia-Sunni schisms. I said after that, I can tell you the dates also from when these contradictions became sharp. That was roughly with the advent of Ayatollah Khomeini in Iran 79. But I'll come to that later, right? So once again, these differences started coming to surface. And please remember, during entire phase of Cold War, what is Cold War? What were the issues? Please listen to my lecture on Cold War, right? So the thing is that during Cold War, and the entire American foreign policy was guided by the doctrine called Truman Doctrine. What was Truman Doctrine? Containment of communism. So prevent communism from spreading here, right? So the thing is that during entire phase of Cold War, Pakistan and Iran became close ally of United States. Of course, it may sound quite surprising. Both the countries became quite, literally client states of USA, right? And USA started helping them with money, with arms, with everything. What was the purpose of USA? As I said, that's the logic of Cold War. That is, they thought that since Soviet Union is above Pakistan and Afghanistan, till then all this region, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, what we call as Central Asian republics, were part of Soviet Union. So Americans were always afraid that communism may spread further below. It is very easy since, on account of its proximity to Soviet Union. So they thought that Pakistan will be wall against communism, communist expansion in South Asia, and Iran will serve like a wall against communist expansion in West Asia. And well, American calculations came correct to a large extent for a long time, right? But all these equations changed from 1979. That was roughly the time when, because till then you will be surprised to know that Iran was a very liberal society under American influence. King Reza Pahlavi wanted to completely westernize Iran. In fact, if you look at the photos of Iran in somewhere around 60s and early 70s, forget about burqa, you could see girls wearing jeans and t-shirts, you could see, girls wearing bikini in beaches and all that. So this was not to the liking of a section of clergy within Iran. And they started rallying around a leader by name Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, who initially was arrested. He was then deported outside, and after, when he saw that resentment against modernization is growing in a section, not substantially, in a section of Iranians, especially the orthodox opinion. They, what should I say? They started anti-American rhetoric, started calling American as Satan, that is devil. And by the time Ayatollah became the rallying point for all such elements. And by 1979, he became so popular that he entered Iran and literally captured political power in Iran. Till then, Iran was ruled by Reza Pahlavi, who was a monarch, right? And completely supported by United States, right? So once Ayatollah Khomeini took power, right, Reza Pahlavi left Iran, and in fact, many of the diplomats in American embassy in Tehran were taken as hostage by Ayatollah, and this particular king fled to America. A country that was very, very close to him. As a result, Ayatollah started demanding that America should return. Anyway, he had a very extremely anti-American orientations. As a result, and he demanded that Reza Pahlavi should be returned, handed over to Iran, and America simply refused. America was worried that they have lost a client state which was serving as a wall against communist expansion in West Asia. And since then, Americans and Iran have become highly inimical countries towards each other, right? And Americans were also looking for punishing Iran. But by the time, as I said, countries like Qatar, countries like Saudi Arabia, countries like Oman, countries like UAE became very close to United States. Despite Arab-Israel conflict, they became very close to, in fact, these countries became suppliers of oil to America, and not only that, these countries became market for many of the American products, and most important, these countries became net purchasers of American arms, right? So they were looking for, America was looking for some opening to take revenge against Ayatollah Khomeini for displacing the pro-American regime of Reza Pahlavi, right? And that was roughly the time when Saddam Hussein in neighboring, if this is Iraq, this is Iran. If this is Iran, Iraq is somewhere here. Country that is attached to Iraq, IRAQ, and this is Iran, IRAN, right? Attached to this. Now here you have to understand the kind of mischief which demography plays, right? Iran is primarily a Shia country, and Iraq is also predominantly a Shia country, right? That is almost 60% of the population is Shia, right? Some 8% of the population are Kurds, and some 25 to 30% population are Sunnis. Now, here you can see a paradox that a predominantly Shia country was ruled by a Sunni dictator, that is Saddam Hussein, right? So once everything went on well, as long as Reza Pahlavi was there, because America was confident that Iran will serve as a wall against communist expansion in West Asia. But that was not to be. By the time Ayatollah Khomeini took power, and like that, he started propagating pan-Islamism, and as a result, pan-Islam ideology of pan-Islamism at least had an emotional appeals to all over the Muslims all over the world even today, right? So as a result, Muslims started rallying around. Ayatollah Khomeini became the hero for Muslim youths all over the world, right? Now, this was not to the liking of Saudi sheikhs. Saudi sheikhs. What was their problem? They thought that because Ayatollah, like many of the caliphs, used to believe that Islam does not recognize nationalities. Islam does not recognize monarchs. Islam does not recognize democracy. Islam recognizes only caliphate or khalifa. So they were worried that this movement will enter their countries also. That's the reason they too were quite cut up with Iran. Plus Shia Sunni schisms was always there. Saudi Arabia anyway is predominantly Sunni country, right? But at the same times, they were aware of the fact that Iranian army is very strong. We will not be able to rub Iran the wrong way and still be assured about our security. And America anyway, so I mean you can see interest of all these countries started coinciding. Like, and there were some dispute between Iraq and Iran near that what we call as Persian Gulf. But it was a minor dispute. But primarily dispute was that how can a Sunni rule in a country which is predominantly Shia. So that initial opposition to Saddam Hussein was also there, and Saddam Hussein also believed that the Shia rebels inside Iraq are being aided and abetted by Iran. So as I said, America was cut up because Reza Pahlavi was displaced, and under Ayatollah, Iran became anti-American country. Then, I mean, this mass appeal of Ayatollah Khomeini, especially when he started talking about pan-Islamism, affected, I mean, created enough apprehensions in the minds of Saudi Kingdom. And anyway, this difference between Iraq and Iraq, because of, as I said, intra-civilizational clash was there. So they thought that why not we teach a lesson to Ayatollah. That led to Iran-Iraq war in 79. And this war continued for a very, very long time, almost for 10 years, right? And after that, they declared ceasefire. And please remember, that was the time when Saddam Hussein was supplied with all kinds of weapons, including chemical weapons, by America to teach a lesson to Ayatollah Khomeini and Iran, right? So, once Iran became a fundamentalist state under Ayatollah, Saddam Hussein became ally of America and Saudi Arabia, because they thought that why not we use this person against. So this war lasted, which caused immense damage in terms of men and material, and finally somewhere in 1989, both these countries called for ceasefire, right? And in that war, Saddam Hussein suffered heavily, I mean lost it. As a result, he started requesting both Saudi Arabia and America to compensate for that loss. They initially did compensate, but the thing is that that compensation was nowhere near what Saddam Hussein was expecting. Of course, see, even countries like India, China cannot afford a straight war for beyond 1 month or 2 months. Imagine war lasted between Iran and Iraq for almost 10 years, almost a decade, right? As a result, Saddam Hussein initially thought that these countries will compensate him and all that, and by that time he also became ambitious. And not only that, the Shia Sunni differences were further widened under, in a very planned way also, under the direction of Saudi Arabia. How? Because Saudi Arabia thought that how can pan-Islamism be led by a Shia? If at all there should be pan-Islamism, it should be led by Sunni, right? And almost 80% of the Muslims in this world, all over the world, are Sunnis. So they thought leadership of pan-Islamism should be with Sunnis, right? As I said, there are many other dimensions. I am explaining you the dimensions that ultimately prove decisive, although they may sound very trivial, right? So the thing is, as a result, you will be surprised to know that billions of rupees were pumped just to, exploit this schism between Shias and Sunnis. Universities were created, madrasas were created all over the world, mosques were built all over the world, mullahs were given huge amount of money just to preach that Shias and Sunnis are totally different. Shias, Sunnis are the true followers of Islam. Shias are either kafirs or they do not follow true Islam, right? And this, that difference was already there. As a result, this schism between the two communities further started getting, these communities getting apart further after this. It was a huge project. As I said, chairs were purchased in university on Islamic studies, right? All over the world, madrasas were open. All over the world, mosques were built, right? Seminaries were created, right? Islamic scholars were paid heavily in order to show that Sunni version of Islam is true version of Islam. Shias are all apostates, or they are, either kafirs or at best deviationist. As I said, at best deviationist, at worst kafirs, right? So this differences, as I said, it was not created in 79, it was exploited in 79, right? That always existed. As I said, it existed immediately after the death of Prophet Muhammad, right? As a result, Iraq, if you look at Iraq, it is divided into three important regions. If you look at Iraq, southernmost, it is Shias. This region is Sunnis, and this region, it is Kurdish, a region that shares boundary with Turkey, right? And as I said, majorities are Shias, but ruled by a Sunni dictator. So the rebel groups in Shias, since there was no democracy, even today there is no democracy in these countries, right? So as a result, Saddam Hussein always believed that these rebels are being helped by Iran. Not only Shia rebels, but even Kurdish rebels are getting assistance from Iran. So as a result, after fighting such a long war at the instigation of Saudi Arabia and America, Saddam Hussein thought that he will be suitably compensated, but that did not happen. And he also had the ambition of emerging as pan-Islamic figure, as some sort of a leader of, he also started seeing himself in messianic terms as a new Khalifa. Although it is very, frankly speaking, Saddam Hussein, despite all his shortcomings, provided a semblance of stability inside Iraq, right? But as I said, Kurds were totally opposed to him, Shias were also opposed to him. As a result, Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, invaded a very small but highly rich country called Kuwait, right? One of the richest countries in the world, one of the richest, maybe after this, what we call Qatar and others, right? One of the richest countries. So invaded Kuwait. Kuwait was not in a position to defend itself because militarily it was quite weak country in relation to army of Saddam Hussein, especially their Republican Guard and all that. But please remember, Kuwait was one of the richest countries in that region, right? One of the richest, and with a huge deposit of oil. And Saddam took the pretext that historically it was one of the fifth or sixth state of Iraq. It should have been with Iraq and all that. I mean, the usual pretext which any warmonger gives, right? Let us not waste our time on that. Fact is that Kuwait was supported by Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia, as soon as oil was discovered and with the help of petrodollars, these economies became rich, and very soon many of these countries converted their economic strength into military strength. And Saudi Arabia after that started considering itself as leader of Sunnis all over the world, right? And many countries also accepted this kind of leadership of Saudi Arabia, right? So the thing is that uh, Kuwait was very close to Saudi Arabia and in turn to United States of America. So it was quite obvious that they would come to the rescue of Kuwait, right? So I mean, this I'm talking about 1991. Of course, he invaded Kuwait in 1990 itself. But the thing is that I mean, many negotiations were worked out with Saddam Hussein, but somehow Saddam Hussein did not accept any of that. Saddam was warned to withdraw, which he didn't, and finally, after exhausting all the warnings, as you know, UN Security Council has the option. See, after, as I said, warning, request, right, embargo, sanctions, then if UN Security Council is left with no option, then war is the only option. And by that time, please remember, Soviet Union also collapsed. So there was no compulsion for Russia to support or go against American resolution, right? Because that was the time when America and Russia became close countries also, right? Because Russia needed economic assistance from America. So entire Security Council was literally dominated by America. And Americans, I mean, despite repeated warnings, when Saddam Hussein refused to withdraw from Kuwait, then world community was left with no other option except launching war on Saddam Hussein. That was the time when they invaded, I mean, they attacked, and the very first day, all the air bases of America, of Iraq were destroyed by America with their carpet bombing. They bombed Iraq left, right, center, and not only that, there was an additional, what should I say, satisfaction to Americans, because they wanted to undo Vietnam. Because after Vietnam War, world was thinking that America will not be able to, I mean, fight a war with a nation on the ground and win. So they wanted to destroy that perception as well. So as a result, Saddam Hussein was wrongly defeated, and this is how Kuwait was liberated. A time came when Saddam realized that he is no match for American and UN forces. As a result, he withdrew, right? But that was also the time when Saddam Hussein became a very hated figure in America, but a very loud figure among large section of Muslim opinion, especially the youths. The way Ayatollah Khomeini became hero of Islam in 79, Saddam Hussein, I mean, became something, a similar figure, right? As you know, during that war, he launched 2 or 3 missiles into Israel also. So it appeared to Muslims all over the world, here is the person who is still fighting for the cause of Palestinians. Others are simply, I mean, doing lip service to that cause. So he started emerging as hero of that, right? So these things continued for long after withdrew. I mean, there was a ceasefire and Saddam once again started ruling. But by that time, Iraq was damaged very badly by series of bombings from America. As I said, use the word carpet bombing. As a result, Iran, but sanctions continued on Iraq, and Saddam Hussein found it very, very difficult to rebuild the war-ravaged economy or withstand this kind of sanction. Take, for example, there are sanctions on a country like Qatar by the local neighbors, but it is in a position to withstand that. I'll explain that later, right? Saddam Hussein was not in a position to. So as a result, there was mass resentment started brewing inside Iraq against Saddam Hussein. Anyway, majority population, that is Shias, were against him. Kurdish people were also against him, because it is said, again, there are no confirmed reports for that, he used chemical weapons on Kurdish, because Kurdish people always wanted independent, a separate Kurdistan, right? As a result, I mean, that region was bombarded, in which almost 1 lakh Kurdish people perished. It is said that Saddam Hussein used that. So anyway, they too were against Saddam Hussein, right? So a civil war-like situation was, what should I say, was in the process of making. It was only a matter of time when Iraq would have got enmeshed into civil war, which subsequently happened. We will see that later, right? As a result, as I said, opinion, although the world Muslim opinion was turning in favor of Saddam Hussein, right? Except the rulers. Rulers were totally, I mean, the rulers like Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and Oman, UAE. Anyway, they were against Saddam Hussein, right? But the public, as I said, Saddam Hussein literally became a hero. There were students wearing t-shirts with his photographs and all that, right? But as I said, these are very peripheral points. And after that, in 2001, you know the famous incident, Twin Towers were destroyed, right, by Osama bin Laden and all that. And after that, America thought that this is the time for me to teach lesson to all their adversaries, right? I mean, please listen to my lecture on India-US relations and India-Afghanistan relations. You will know the implications of 9/11, what happened there and other thing. In 2001, roughly 2002, America invaded Afghanistan. And subsequently, America thought that, and they wanted to get rid of Saddam Hussein also, right? So as a result, they started, I don't know to what extent there is a truth in this statement, that he was being helped by Al-Qaeda. He had close links with Al-Qaeda, or he was hiding weapons of mass destruction. See, assuming even for the time being, if we accept that Saddam Hussein was hiding the weapons of mass destruction, question is, who gave Saddam Hussein all these weapons? It is ultimately Americans. They gave these weapons to Saddam Hussein to be used against Iran during Iran-Iraq war. So the thing is that it was like devil quoting from scriptures, but sometimes, you know, devil has right to quote from scriptures. That's exactly what America thought. And under the pretext of Saddam Hussein possessing weapons of mass destruction, they once again invaded in 2003. They invaded Iraq, dislodged completely the regime of Saddam Hussein. Finally, he was caught and hanged. And then they started saying that we are doing this for consortium of democracy. We want to promote democracies all over the world. It's a different matter. I mean, throughout the history, I mean, post-Cold War history, they kept supporting worst kind of dictators. But anyway, as I said, in global politics, these contradictions are very natural in foreign policies. I mean, there is not much to it, right? So as a result, once Saddam Hussein was hanged, America thought that now it's time for us to establish democracy, right? And they conducted elections there. And once elections were conducted, so obviously it was very clear that power will come into the hands of Shias. And once power came into the hands of Shias, somewhere around 2005, this is the opportunity they were waiting. As I said, anyway, majority population was Shia 60%, Sunnis 30%, Kurds 10%, and others, rest others, you have Yazdis and others, right? So once democracy, one man, one vote principle was established under, the supervision of America, power went into the hands of Shias. And this is the time Shias were waiting for. And once they got power, they thought that this is the time for us to teach lesson to Sunnis, right? And they started removing all Sunnis from important posts, from army, from including Saddam Hussein's Republican Guard was completely disbanded. And they went to the extent of the new government, which was completely Shia government. They simply refused to share power with Sunnis. Rather, they thought this is the time for us to teach a lesson to Sunnis, right? And by the time, as I said, Shia-Sunni clashes started occurring all over the world, including in India. In fact, that was the time when Shia-Sunni riots used to be yearly affairs in Lucknow. And that was the case in large tracts of the world. So as a result, Shias started completely, de-Sunnifying the governance structures, including security structures, right? But you should know the fact that these, all those people who constituted the new army, they were basically rebels or terrorists, or as I said, call it, it depends on which side of the fence you are, right? So it was not a very trained army, it was not a very professional army like Republican Guard of Saddam Hussein. And that was also the time when Al-Qaeda wanted to spread its testicles all over the world and take revenge against America, right? So, ferment problem for its invasion of Afghanistan. So now it became all-out war between Al-Qaeda and United States of America, right? So Al-Qaeda established a center there under the leadership of, I don't remember his name, Zarwari or somebody, right? Under his leadership, branch of Al-Qaeda was established called Al-Qaeda of Iraq. And subsequently, Zarwari was killed and leadership came into the hands of Baghdadi, right? Baghdadi, as I said, a general should be lucky. Baghdadi, many factors favored him besides his rhetoric, right? That he started talking about Khalifa, re-establishing an institution of Khalifa. As you know, let me tell you briefly the history of Khalifa. Abu Bakr became first Khalifa, second was Uthman, third was Umar, and fourth was Ali. First four, what Islam calls as Rashiduns. Rashiduns means rightly guided people, right? So they literally spread Islam throughout the world, right from Spain up to Indonesia, right? Under their able leadership, they could spread Islam throughout the world, right? So again, I don't know to what extent this spread was voluntary and to what extent it was on the basis of sword, right? But anyway, as I said, I normally don't go into the ethical and moral questions. I read the history as it is rather than as it should be. So the thing is that fact is that Islam spread. Its spread was quite impressive in a short period of time. So Al-Qaeda Baghdadi once again started talking about establishing an Islamic state. And after sometimes, after fourth Caliph, uh, Khilafat or Caliphate shifted to Damascus. From Damascus, for time being, for sometimes it shifted to, say, North, 1912, I think, to North Africa. And in 1600, it shifted to Turkey. And Turkish Empire became one of the powerful empires in the whole world, right? A very, very powerful empire. And it is Turkish Empire which ruled the large tract of what we call as West Asia, right? And ruler of Turkey became Khalifa, and he remained Khalifa for very, very long time, right up to 1923, right? So then he renamed his party from Al Qaeda of Iraq to ISIS, that is Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Now, question arises, how suddenly this man became very powerful, right? Because he started operating from a place called Mosul here. I mean, he started his operation from that part of Iraq which was Sunni dominant, because he knew Shias will not accept him. He himself was a Sunni, right? Al Qaeda actually believed in spreading the Sunni, rather the Wahhabi version of Islam. So that was totally opposed to Shias. Anyway, he couldn't have got support here. Similarly, he couldn't have got support in Kurdistan. As a result, he launched his operation from here. And how he became very powerful and so rich, and how ISIS became such a lethal force, right? For this, you must understand that as soon as democratic process took shape in Iraq, Sunnis lost power, power went into the hands of Shias, and Shias removed all the Sunni officials from security structures and even government structures, right, who were highly experienced and all that, and made it very clear that there will not be any pension for these officials. Now just imagine military officials at the advanced age being thrown on roads, and with the condition that there will not be any pension to them, what they would do, right? So all this, especially the most sophisticated army of Saddam Hussein called Republican Guards, Baghdadi on the other hand started promising them salaries. And they thought that if we fight war, mostly military people, they get that professional satisfaction also if they are engaged in conflicts and all that. So as a result, all this Republican Guards, the Sunni element of Iraqi army started joining Baghdadi. And with the passage of time, Baghdadi made ISIS the most deadly, highly dangerous, highly lethal, highly sophisticated and extremely cruel organization in the world. And it became an extremely rich organization. From where they started getting money? They started getting money by process of extortion. 1, 2, looting of banks. 3, ransoms. 4, attacking historically important sites, selling its antiques, right? Then forcibly taking petrol, right? Petrol wells, so oil wells, right? Plus killing people, the enemies of Islam, in a very, very brutal manner, as you must have seen, right? And trying to sell their body parts, then kidnapping girls, selling them for prostitution, right? All these factors made ISIS not only, as I said, very well organized, but extremely rich organization. In fact, their budgets ran to the extent of 2 billions. That is the extent to which they looted, and they started getting recruits from all over the world. And let me tell you, initially they got even help from Saudi Arabia and from some Sunni countries, because they were fighting, their prime targets were Shias, right? So they got financial assistance and other kinds of help from countries like Turkey, from countries like Saudi Arabia, from countries like Qatar and all that. But once they captured sufficient area of almost the size of England, that is western side of Iraq and eastern side of Syria, they established their Caliphate. Caliphate means they established their kingdom there. Right. Once they established a Khilafat in a tract of land which is as large as England, which included, as I said, western part of Syria and western part of Iraq and eastern part of Syria, they started calling it as Islamic State. And Baghdadi declared himself as the new Khalifa of Islam. And he went to the extent of saying that Islam does not recognize any sheikdoms or kingdom. This enraged sheikhs of Gulf countries, right? And after that, as I said, now question arises, how is that? And I mean, what Iran army was doing? I mean, when his forces came right up to Baghdad, right? What Iraqi army was doing? Answer is that Iraqi army was not a well-trained army, right? As I said, they were mostly militants who converted themselves into soldiers, right? Number one. Two, as I said, it was never a professional army, right? Which was, as I said, a militant group converted into army in a very, very ad hoc and haphazard manner. It is said that there is such mass corruption in Iraqi army that 40% of the employees are mostly on leaves by showing this presence by bribing their superiors. So it became literally a cakewalk for Baghdadi, right? It is only when Iraqi government, which was a Shia government, in turn held by Iran started sending forces that they were in a position to fight back against Baghdadi, right? And Baghdadi meanwhile involved himself even in Syrian war, right? Initially he aligned with a terrorist group there called Al-Nusra, right? After that there was clashes broke out between Baghdadi and Al-Nusra themselves, right? Plus Baghdadi was facing constant attacks from Kurdish people also, because he enriched Kurdish people as well. He started talking in terms of not nationalities, but complete the whole Muslims all over the world must establish an Islamic Caliphate. He was very clear. As a result, he was getting many recruits from all over the world. With that army, he was looting, as I said, looting antiques, ransom, looting banks became source of his revenue. And with that revenue, he was recruiting more and more people. As a result, he was becoming more and more powerful. In fact, he got shot in the arm in the form of the Saddam Hussein's army joining him lock, stock and barrel. I also gave you the reason why it joined, right? So that was really a shot in the arm for Baghdadi. But as I said, Baghdadi started indulging in mindless violence, right? Killing people on minor suspicions and killing them in a very, very brutal manner and justifying all this in the name of Islam, right? But situation was no more simple. By simply talking about Caliphate, you couldn't have got the support of at least Muslim rulers here, right? So that was the time, and when he started talking in terms of Caliphate all over the world and criticizing Sheikhdom, that was roughly the time when Saudi sheikhs requested their boss America to drop some atom bomb and teach a lesson to Baghdadi. And on the other hand, Baghdadi was involved in a war with Syria also. And you know, Syria was ruled by Bashar al-Assad. Please hear my lecture on Arab Springs, right? And in turn, he was supported by Russia. So anyway, bombarding the bases of ISIS. See, Baghdadi in the process, in his, what should I say, religious fundamentalism, and in his, became so overconfident that he created too many enemies, including those people who were supporting him, like Saudi Arabia, Turkey and other things. They too turned against him, or at least started remaining neutral. Because you will be surprised to know that most of the people used to enter Iraq through Turkey. Turkey provided them some sort of a launching pad, right? So many Sunni countries directly or indirectly were supporting ISIS, right? Including Saudi Arabia. So indirectly including America, right? But America started intervening on account of three reasons. Because he was attacking Kurds, Kurds anyway were supporters of America, America supported them, Israel also supports their cause of separate Kurdistan, number one. Two, when sheikhs turned against him and requested America, right? So these were the reasons why he actually acquired too many enemies. And by that time, America was also getting discredited because Russia was trying to bombard the bases. Russia was getting all the credit for finishing off ISIS. So America also started bombing the bases of ISIS. And finally, as you know, Baghdadi was killed, and ISIS terror network, I won't say completely dismantled, but certainly substantially dismantled, right? So this is story of ISIS and Khilafat. But please understand, ISIS physical kingdom, geographical kingdom has ended, but its virtual kingdom has not ended. It continues to be lethal and extremely dangerous even now, because they continue to get recruits from all over the world, including Western countries, right? So as a result, it is still a powerful force, although it may not be although Baghdadi may not be there, and secondly, they may not be having a particular area under them, but still somewhere down the line they do get support from in the sense, there is a good reason why ISIS is not completely dismantled. A reason is that Saudi Arabia feels that if not today, tomorrow we can use these people against Iran and against Shias. America feels that, well, these fools can be used against China in Xinjiang and Russia in Chechnya if time demands. In the name of Islam, this fighting force can be used. So, as I said, if America and Soviet Union or Russia want, they can completely dismantle terror network of ISIS. But deliberately they are not doing, because they want to keep Shias also engaged in the war. Indirectly, Iran will be engaged, right? So, the thing is that if it becomes too big for the shoes, then they will try to harm ISIS. Otherwise, they simply look the other way. That is the situation of ISIS right now. As I said, its physical kingdom has ended, but its virtual kingdom is still intact, right? Then civil war in Syria and Yemen. Please hear my lecture on, Arab Springs, Shia-Sunni conflict. 2010, Arab Spring started from a country called Tunisia. Please hear my lecture on Arab Springs, right? In these various countries, right, both Iran and Saudi Arabia supported the rival parties. As I said, after Gulf War, emergence of Ayatollah Khomeini, a sort of regional Cold War has emerged between Iran and Saudi Arabia, because Iran considers itself to be the leader of Shias all over the world, and Saudi Arabia considers itself to be the protector of Sunni Muslims all over the world. So during Arab Springs, right, if ruler was Shia, right, Iran was supporting the ruler and Saudi Arabia was supporting the rebel groups, as you can find in Syria, right? Similarly, in In Yemen, the rulers are Sunnis, the Houthi rebels are Shias. As a result, Iran is supporting the rebels and ruling alliance is being supported by Saudi Arabia. Look at the country called Bahrain. 70% it is Shias but ruled by a Sunni dictator. As a result, the rebel groups are being supported by Iran and ruling regime is being supported by Saudi Arabia. So there is a struggle for dominance, a competition for dominance in West Asia between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And this also gets reflected through Shia Sunni schisms because Iran represents Shias and Saudi Arabia represents Sunnis, right? So about civil war which is going on, which is a bloody war in which both the countries, Iran as well as Saudi Arabia, are militarily involved today, right? And if you want to know more about the civil war, please hear my lecture on Arab Springs. Then, as I said, Kurdish problem. What is this Kurdish problem? If you look at the map of West Asia, right? Here you have Iran. Here you have Iran. Here you have Turkey, right? Here you have Iraq, right? And here you have Iraq, and here you have Saudi Arabia. So the thing is, who are Kurdish people? Kurdish people are I mean, it's a very, very powerful race, a fighting race, and race endowed with lot of feeling of pride and self-respect, right? And they constitute almost, I mean, their population runs into somewhere around 3 crores, I think. And from a very, very long time, they have been demanding, well, when there can be a separate nation for Jews who are less than 1 crore, why not a separate nation for Kurdish people who are almost 3 crores? And they are spread in countries like Iran, some Iraq, quite substantial, Turkey, one of the largest concentration of Turks, and this region of Syria. So from a very, very long time, they are fighting for a separate Kurdistan, which will comprise areas, small part of Iran, entire northern part of Iraq, substantial southern part of Turkey, and eastern part of Syria. So this is their ultimate aim, and they are fighting for it, and they are endowed with rich resources and all that. Sometimes, and here paradox is that while Turkish government supports Kurdish rebels in Iraq, but it comes down on Turkish rebels heavily in Syria and Turkey, right? And there are many countries which are sympathetic towards the cause of separate Kurdistan, right? Like Israel, like America, they are quite supportive of this demand. Turkey also, but Kurdistan in Iraq, not inside Kurdish. But problem with such a, dual policy is that when there can be separate Kurdistan for 15 lakhs Kurds in Iraq, why not for 50 lakhs Kurds in Turkey, right? And many militant Turkey groups, many militant Kurdish groups inside Turkey are fighting a civil war against Turkish government, right? They were even opposed to Kemal Pasha Atatürk, right? Because he believed in secularizing Turkey, not acceptable to Kurdish people. Erdogan, the present leader of Turkey, is not at all acceptable to Kurdish people. So this civil war-like situation is going on in this region, right? So Kurdish problem is also a very fundamental problem, and if not today, tomorrow, I think Iraq will be split into southern Shiastan, middle Sunnistan and Kurdistan. And Kurds want a larger Kurdistan which will include small part of Iran, substantial part of Iraq, entire northern part, and substantial territory of Turkey and some territory of Syria. Right? This is their conception of Kurdish people or Kurdistan. And please remember, it is they who fought ISIS on ground and successfully could push back ISIS from the northern regions of Iraq. See, America simply supported them from behind, but ultimately it is they who resisted ISIS. Right? So this is about Kurdish problem. Civil war in Syria and Greece, already I told you. Arab Springs, and during entire Arab Springs, you can find Shia-Sunni differences constantly coming to surface, whether it was Yemen, whether it is Syria, whether it is, Bahrain or any other places. Right. Now, what exactly are the policies of Iran, Saudi Arabia and Turkey here? Right. These are the three major powers in this region. Before that, let me tell you one more recent development which must have occurred some 2-3 days back. There has been a treaty between Israel and UAE. What is UAE? United Arab Emirates, which consists of 7 important emirates like Dubai, Abu Dhabi and Sharjah. These are some of the important emirates, right? So, and all these are basically chelas of Saudi Arabia, whether it is Oman, Kuwait, UAE, all these countries, right? Initially, Qatar also was there, but Qatar somehow believed in following a very, very independent foreign policy because of the richness, because it is the richest country in the world, not just in that region, but the richest country in terms of per capita income, right? If you will go by per capita income, it is 5 or 6 times richer country than America also, right? So as a result, but Saudi Arabia is some sort of a leader of many of these countries, all 7 emirates, then as I said, Oman, Kuwait, Egypt, right? All these countries are quite comfortable in accepting the leadership of Saudi Arabia, right? So because of threat of Iran, right, Saudi Arabia somewhere down the line has shed its hostility towards Israel, right? And reason is, again, they are friends of America, and Israel is also one of the closest countries to America. And in many cases, Saudi Arabia is thinking in terms of having a tactical alliance with Iran, with Israel, in order to teach a lesson to Iran. In fact, Khashoggi's murder, many people say, is the handiwork of King Salman with the active connivance of Mossad of Israel, right? We don't know, but this happened in Istanbul in Turkey, right? So as a result, now many Gulf countries wants to have a very tactical alliance with Israel. I mean, the Jordanian king has went to the extent of requesting Israel to protect him if at all there is attack by ISIS, right? So, and anyway, Israel is helping Kurds in realization of their dream of separate Kurdistan. So, UAE also thought, because UAE is, the area which believes in, they are more interested in development rather than spreading Islam. Of course, spreading Islam is also could be their agenda, but they are more concentrated on development, about future of oil, looking for alternative basis to development like tourism and all that. They are, more oriented towards that, and they thought that for that we require a very peaceful West Asia, and they think that this is possible if we enter into some sort of a tactical alliance with Israel. That is what they did, right? Now, this is not acceptable to many Islamic countries. Now, what exactly is that? We have to see the role of these three major powers: Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. Iran, as I said, considers itself to be the leader of Shias all over the world. And anyway, the government of Syria, is led by an Alawite Shia, that is Bashar al-Assad, close ally of Iran. Then government of Iraq is also headed by a Shia, close ally of Iran, right? So to support all these governments and suppress the rebel groups in these countries wherever you find Shia rulers, right? And then there are many hotspots which are quite propitious for Shia crescent rising across West Asia. Take, for example, a country like Lebanon, right, which has a very sophisticated militant group called Hezbollah, right, who are Shias in turn supported by Iran, right? Then Hamas in Palestine or in Israel are supported by Hamas, who in turn are supported by Iran. That's also one of the reasons for discord in the relationship of Israel and Iran, right? Plus, Houthi rebels who literally took over power from Sunni rulers in Yemen are Shias in turn supported by Iran. And there are other, plus coming to country like Bahrain, 70% Shias, 30% Sunnis, but ruled by a Sunni dictator, right? So as a result, Iran feels today, or if not today, tomorrow, we are going to dislodge the regime of, Sunni regime, and one more state will fall into the lap of Iran, that is Bahrain, right? So you can see the rise of Shia crescent across West Asia. And wherever possible, wherever you have substantial number of Shias, Iran is trying to support them, who are in turn are fomenting trouble for their rulers, right? Through these tactics, and as I said, Iran has a very powerful military, and despite sanctions on Iran, it is able to withstand those sanctions because of its location. Iran is located in one of the trade and economically very vibrant region called Persian Gulf, plus it has complete control over certain important straits like Strait of Hormuz and other places. So, Iran is in a position to withstand these sanctions and expand its influence, right, despite opposition from Saudi Arabia, right? As I said, just look at the map of West Asia, whether it is Syria, Lebanon, Palestine, Bahrain, Yemen, you can find Shias or Iran expanding its reach, right? And by supporting the cause of Palestine and thinking that it can emerge as the leader of Muslims all over the world, including Sunnis, right? Plus, it also foment troubles for Saudi Arabia, even in Sunni countries, if those Sunni countries are not favorably disposed towards Saudi Arabia, like Qatar. I'll explain that later, right? So, as now question is, what does Saudi Arabia policies, objectives are? Saudi Arabia firstly wants to neutralize Iran, number one. Two, wants to preserve the rule of Sunnis all over West Asia, except countries like Iran, right? They want once again the rule of Sunnis back inside Iraq, although I don't think it's possible in foreseeable future. But if not that, at least split Iraq into three and have a separate homeland for Sunnis. Secondly, as I said, it is struggle for domination in that region. Secondly, as I said, they want to completely marginalize Iran. As a result, they are supporting the civil war, the rebel groups. There are at least 50, almost all of them are being supported by Saudi Arabia and they want to dislodge the regime of Bashar al-Assad. Because as I said, it is exactly opposite of Bahrain, where it is ruled by the minority Alawite Shias. As I said, Assad is an Alawite Shia, and Sunni groups are the rebel groups. So there also Saudi Arabia is interfering. Then in Yemen, Saudi Arabia is trying to help the ruling regime, which is fighting pitched battle against Houthi rebels, right? Like this, you can find one country after, like in Bahrain, right? Saudi Arabia is supporting the Sunnis who are the ruling elites there, though they are in minority. 70% are Shias who are rebels, and ruling regime is being supported by Saudi Arabia, and the rebel groups are being supported by Iran. So you can find how the interests of Saudi Arabia and Iran are directly clashing, right? Now coming to the third actor, that is Turkey. Now Turkey has, especially the present political leadership, has never forgotten the fact that it was Turkey that was center of Khalifa, right? Khalifathood was there with the Turkey for almost I think 500 to 600 years, right? Until it ended in 1923. So Turkey always had that. Then they thought that after especially after, say, post Second World War, and especially with the discovery of oil, center of gravity of Islamic politics shifted from Turkey to Saudi Arabia, right? So they thought that, and Saudi Arabia always had that inherent advantage, besides being oil-rich country, very rich country and other things. The holiest of the Islamic shrines are in Saudi Arabia, that is Makkah and Medina, right? And Muslims all over the world perform Hajj. So that is a net revenue earner for Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia, because of its petrodollars, newfound wealth, it believed in extending its influences, and it literally became a de facto, leader of Sunnis all over the world. And initially Turkey also accepted it, right? They thought that, well, in fact, Turkey was quite westernized as long as it was secular, because a part of Turkey falls in Europe. That's the reason why it even became member of NATO, military alliance, right? Of course, there are reasons why it cannot become member of say European Union. There are many reasons. Primary reasons are economic reasons, because its economy cannot match, their per capita income cannot match the European countries. See, in order to become member of European Union, you require certain threshold of development, certain threshold of growth. Otherwise, you can't. So the thing is that now Turkey also is facing problems from Kurdish rebels, right? For some times it aligned with, on certain issues, it was aligned with Saudi Arabia, that is to contain Iran and all that. But of late, a new Islamic axis is being developed, because a large section of Muslim leadership is feeling that Saudi Arabia has betrayed the cause of Palestinian and betrayed the cause of Islam, right? As a result, there should be a new axis against Saudi Arabia. But countries that are on the side of Saudi Arabia are, as I said, all these 7 emirates of Dubai, Abu Dhabi, Sharjah, right? And countries like Egypt, countries like Kuwait, countries like Oman, they are on the side of Saudi Arabia. Plus a large section of Muslim clergy all over the world is on the side of Saudi Arabia, because for 2 reasons. primary reason is because they get money, and they justify it by saying that ultimately it is the land of Muhammad, it is the land where Islam took its birth. So Saudi Arabia will always be the center of gravity of Muslim world, will be in Saudi Arabia, right? So by using all these techniques, Saudi Arabia wants to establish its dominance in this region or preserve its existing domination. But as I said, this domination is being increasingly questioned by a country like Turkey. Turkey is another powerful country in the region, right? It feels that actually Khalifahood was with Turkish people, and you know, earlier also historically, Turkish people it is who captured the Arab world and treated them very badly. So that old enmity, I mean, exists at the level of consciousness. So as a result, Turkey wants to reclaim the leadership of Islamic world, especially the Sunni Islamic world, right? As a result, you can find an axis has developed between Turkey, Pakistan, Malaysia. These are the countries that are coming on the side of Turkey, because they are quite cut up with Arab centric nature of Islam, right? So the thing is that these countries are also supporting. Now I don't know whether Indonesia can join them in future or not, but Iran is tactically supporting them, right? Because of its enmity towards Saudi Arabia, Iran is although ideally Iran would like to lead this new Islamic bloc. But as I said, all these Sunni countries will not accept the leadership of Iran for the simple reason Sunnis will not work under Shias. So they will never accept the leadership of Iran. But Iran many a times plays these tactics, like it is supporting Hamas in Palestine, knowing fully well that they are Sunnis, not Shias. But in order to embrace Saudi Arabia, they do that. So here also there is every likelihood of Iran supporting this new axis of Malaysia, Pakistan under the leadership of Turkey, right? That is the reason why you can find Pakistani ruler. I mean, it is ultimately army which rules, right? That is Bajwa. When he went, Prince Salman even refused to meet him. That is the snub which Saudi Arabia gave, because Saudi Arabia got clear indication that Pakistan is playing double game, taking money from us and indirectly trying to support Turkey. And Pakistan, let me tell you, has always plays this double game. If you do not believe me, please read the book called Deadly Embrace by Bruce Riedel. And Bruce Riedel is not an ordinary person. He was defense and security advisor to 4 American presidents. Bush Sr., then after that Bill Clinton, after Clinton, Bush Jr. and Barack Obama, right? You will know the kind of double game which Pakistan has always played. It has mastered the art of running with the hares and hunting with the hounds. Anyway, so as a result, but this double game is not going to work with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia, after giving such $3 billion loans, has made it very clear to Pakistan that if you do not toe our line, please return that loan. Soft loan. Because Pakistan, this much amount of oil was given to Pakistan at a very concessional rate of interest, and Pakistan was allowed to pay this in future. But the moment Saudis came to know about the double game of Pakistan, they made it very clear, you please return our amount. As a result, they took a soft loan from China and returned it. And this damage, General Bajwa wanted to contain it. With that intention, he wanted to go and convince the Saudi Sheikhdom that Pakistan continues to be your friend and other things. But they snubbed Pakistan, as I said. the Prince Salman, who was supposed to honor Bajwa in a function, but this was before all this trouble erupted, simply refused to meet Pakistani general. It was a huge slap on the back of Pakistan, right? So a new kind of Islamic axis is developing. Now coming to a swing country called Qatar. Qatar is not only, it has a huge deposit of oil and natural gas. Qatar, like Iran, is placed in a very vibrant zone, vibrant economic zone, and Qatar, because of its oil wealth and richness, is one of the, not one, perhaps the richest country in the world, right? And obviously, anyway, it is the in terms of richness, it is number one country in entire West Asia. So, and for a very, very long time, Qatar, the ruling regime of Qatar, I mean the local tribes, all these are basically tribes. Their tribes had a very inimical relations with tribes of, say, Saudi Arabia and tribes of Bahrain. So that enmity was there right from the beginning, but under the larger good of Islamic world, that got subsided. To the extent that Qatar even became member of Saudi-sponsored GCC, Gulf Cooperation Council, right? Who were the members of Gulf Cooperation Council? As I said, same Abu Dhabi, the entire UAE, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and the other countries in that region, right? But as I said, Saudi Arabia always felt that these countries should be, they should not pursue a policy that is independent to the extent of harming Saudi interest, right? That was very clear that in this Gulf Cooperation Council, leader will always be Saudi Arabia, right? So as a result, but as I said, Qatar considered itself to be a too significant country, it was too rich a country to be camp follower of Saudi Arabia, right? As a result, on many occasions, it started asserting its independent foreign policies, right? And Saudi Arabia had a very tactical approach towards aiding terror. Anyway, it is one of the major finances of madrasas, of mosques, and of many of the Islamic militant groups, right? And so is the case with Qatar. Qatar also believes in exporting Islam, and especially Wahhabi version of Islam, right? But on many occasions, Qatar started following very independent policies. As I said, approach of Saudi Arabia was tactical. That is, sometimes you support these terror groups, but if they become too big for their shoes, withdraw the support and ensure they are cut to the size with the help of America. That's what they did to Baghdadi. But Qatar started supporting, even without the approval of Saudi Arabia, militant or terrorist groups like Islamic Brotherhood. Then they started militant groups or terrorist groups in many countries, many countries of Middle East, right? Plus Qatar even started developing close relations with Iran, which was number one enemy of Saudi Arabia. So Saudi Arabia, in order to teach a lesson to Qatar, imposed a blockage, that is land sea aid blockage of Qatar, and close allies of Saudi Arabia like UAE, like Kuwait, or like Oman also followed Saudi Arabia in imposing this sanction. So the follower states of Saudi Arabia joined Saudi Arabia in imposing some kind of an embargo on Qatar, and their pretext was that Qatar is aiding terrorism all over the world, right? And they wanted Qatar to stop aiding terrorists, because Saudi Arabia sometimes it supports terrorists, but at the same time it is afraid also that suppose if they become too big for their shoes, right, then they can turn against Saudi sheikdoms also. As I said, this is exactly what happened in case of Baghdadi. See, they support terror as long as that terror is directed towards Shias or directed towards West, directed towards India, directed towards any other country except their Chand group, right? But Qatar, as I said, indiscriminately supports most of these terror networks, right? Because of its richness. But problem with Qatar with this embargo was that Saudi Arabia thought that Qatar will come on its knees because most of their food items and supplies and vegetables are being supplied through Saudi Arabia from a narrow road which connects in between sea to Qatar and Saudi Arabia, right? But this embargo did not affect Qatar for many reasons. Reasons are they started getting these basic supplies from Iran, which again, as I said, enemy number one of Saudi Arabia. And nextly, as a member of Gulf Cooperation Council, it was very close country to United States of America. In fact, America has their largest Air Force base in Qatar. And Qatar, it's a peculiar country where 80% of the population is foreigners, right? Many Indians and all that, simply to work for Qatari people, who are, as I said, one of the richest people in the world. And Qatar, especially their capital city of Doha, has become one of the significant cities in the world. I mean, comparable to cities like New York, Dubai, Beijing, and all that. International class city. It has one of the best, centers of American studies and all that. Highly forward-looking country, and American interests are too much to be ignored. Now, what America is trying to do is to broker some sort of a peace between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, right? Because they are trying to convince Qatar that your real enemy is Iran, not Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is your friend, but as I said, this hostile relationship between Saudi Arabia and Qatar continues, right? And it is here countries like Turkey and Iran are trying to look for an opening. They think that one of the major sponsors of terror, like Qatar, can come on their side, a country which is so rich and so strategically placed. Qatar can be used against Saudis. So this is the entire politics of Gulf countries, or what you call as West Asia. Now, besides this regional chatraps, besides these regional powers, they in turn are being supported by other major powers, like Iran is being supported by China, Iran is being supported by Russia, India partly it supports, but its interest in Saudi Arabia is too much, so it has to appear neutral, right? Secondly, Saudi Arabia is being supported by Western countries and America. America is one of their thickest allies, right? Turkey is on the both sides and wants to play both the cards, plus in the process emerge as the leader of Islamic countries all over the world, right? Iran similarly wants to play the same game, that is emerge as the leader of Islamic countries. It is indirectly and tactfully supporting the new Islamic axis, which is headed by Turkey, Malaysia, Pakistan. They want to rope in even Indonesia into it, right? So Iran feels that anyway they are not going to get the leadership, but in order to spite Saudi Arabia, they can lend tactical support to this new Islamic axis, right? So this is the politics of West Asia. I'm sure there are so many loose ends in my lecture today because nature of the topic is so complex, it is so complicated that sometimes it becomes very difficult even for a student of international relations to comprehend them, right? So that is the reason why I am saying this. You will have to rewind my lecture too many times in order to understand the details. Now, question could be on sometimes question could be on Arab Springs. For that, hear my lecture on Arab Springs. Sometimes question could be on Shia-Sunni conflict, right? Sometimes question could be on Kurdish problem. Sometimes question could be on a regional Cold War between Iran and Saudi Arabia. And since it is latest, that is treaty between Israel and UAE and New Islamic Axis, there could be questions on that. Now finally, we are left with role of Israel. Now many countries, especially countries like Saudi Arabia and all, they are no more all that sympathetic towards the cause of Palestine in order to antagonize Israel. In fact, indirectly, openly they cannot do it. Indirectly, they are collaborating with Israel because they thought that if they collaborate with Israel, America will be completely on their side, otherwise also in their side, but America will be totally on their side. Number one, Israel, their intelligence network, their counter-terror network can be used against their enemies, especially against Iran, right? And Israel is also tactfully helping these Gulf countries, right? And now these things have come into open also, that is UAE and Israel treaty, right? So this is about politics of West Asia. My request is that you just prepare yourself on the questions which I asked and concentrate broadly. I have tried to explain you a period of almost 100 years in these 14 points, right? Where are these points? Right, these 14 points, I have tried to explain you all this, right? And please try to answer the questions which I raised. And for that, you can read Hindu, you can read a magazine or a journal called World Focus. World Focus, it's a monthly which covers one issue and covers it completely, right? So I'm sure there will be, in times to come, there will be issues on West Asia. If you get that, it hardly costs 100 rupees. Purchase that and read it. And if not, if you feel that is too much, then hear my lecture again and again. Try to understand the complexity of the entire dispute and just substantiate it with whatever is the latest. In fact, I have told you the most latest development, right? I hope it has been clear to you. With this, I conclude. Thanks.